of the society, and I thought about hopping a ride with Bob Gilmore, who was with you a few months back. And have you ever had Bob Flanders from SMS come down and speak with you? Well, did you see his name in the Herald last week? He's working with the state group that is preserving the mills in this area. Okay, and I think he would make a fascinating program for you. You need to bring your sleeping bags because he'll keep you all night. But he's a really nice fellow, and even though he's not an Ozarker, he really, I think, relates to this culture, and you would enjoy him. I want to tell you who I am for those of you who may not know. I was born in the mid-40s here in Douglas County. My father was Orville Brown. Many of you called him Jake Brown, those of you who knew him. And Cinita, you and I are, Logan, you and I are related through perhaps our grandfathers being brothers or something like that. Is that not right? Is that?
I haven't been able to prove it, but there is a relationship.
There's a relationship. I know there is. So, I know. I think we got proof somewhere, but it's there. And whereas my mother was from Arden, she was a Hartley, and she and of course we're related to Glendale Hartley again through having maybe common grandfathers or something like that. I have, she's given me all of her genealogy records, and I'm trying to get up on all of them, and it's amazing to me how it's just almost like everybody is related to everyone in the county. And you can just really look at your family record, and going through there, of course, Frida Pettit shows up in there when she married the Garrisons, who are, Marie and I have been trying to fit that all together this evening.
Well, I know where it fits in.
Okay. But anyway, I want to go through these things that I have either found through research of the Douglas County Herald, or Howard and Marian were really good to spend quite a bit of time with me. A lot of what's here, they gave me the initial guidance. Although I did Howard and Marian, you'll see I followed up a lot by going to the Herald to get exact dates. And I'm kind of excited to do this presentation tonight because of what's going on here in town with the Burrows' involvement in the Avalon. First of all, look at this one. Let's call this the exhibit packet that's in my hand. I like to play with computers too, Marie, and this little map it comes off of a fantastic program that I've come up with called Street Atlas. I can do the same kind of map on any place in the whole nation. I just put in the name of the town, and it gives me Mansfield if I want Mansfield. It gives me Seymour if I want Seymour, for the whole country, not just Missouri. And so this is what I have. The letters you see here on it, they are the places where either through my discussions with Howard and Marian, or my own personal knowledge, there were theaters operating at one time in Avon. They are keyed in the order that I believe that they came into operation. And for example, the letter A represents, if you want to get your bearings, where the Casey store is, just catty corner. Of course, what was there was the Wilson Opera House. And one thing I wanted to see, Cinita.
Do you have a picture of it?
No, I do not.
I do.
All right, all right, all right.
I have one.
Okay, well, who's going to take, who's my secretary? Who's going to take notes of these things? So Cinita's got, okay, she has that. I have some graphics here I want to show you of it that hopefully you'll find interesting. But I'm interested.
I have some old 8th grade graduation announcements where they had their graduation in the Opera House.
Okay. Let's see, my mother's would not have been, hers weren't that far back.
I've forgotten what year. Some of my old Herndon line was graduating.
Okay, well, I've got some things out of these.
Pre-World War I.
Okay. Now, one thing I wanted to get out in my presentation tonight is that I am not convinced as to when the Opera House opened. And I've been told that it's 1913, and I've got some information that that doesn't fit it. It has to be earlier than that, and I'll tell you why. And maybe you already knew that, but anyway, that would be the first place. And the second place, the letter B, is what I call the old Avalon. That's what I remember as a child going to on the east side of the square. And Marilyn, I'm sure you went perhaps when you were really young there. And where I think Wally's Flowers is now. Okay, and then the third one, letter C, is where what I remembered as the Star Theater. Now, what I discovered though, after talking with Howard and Marian, and then also checking the Herald, as many of you, or some of you may remember, the Thrasher Theater that was there in the late 30s. In early, late 30s, it was there for 3 years now, and I'll tell you more about that. Then, this letter D is where the wood cutting shop is right now, on the northeast corner of the square, and which, Howard, you call that the Meeker Building. And I have found in the Herald where the Thrasher Theater did come back a second time, and I think must have been in there in 1943. But what I'm still not clear on is whether the Meekers ever went on separate from the Thrashers. And I think you kind of recollect that they did, but for a short time. And so I haven't identified any dates on it yet. So anyway, we're talking about letter D, that there being two times that was a theater. And then finally, letter E is what I call the new Avalon, which is the one that the Burrows are now involved with. Now, the other ones that I have found in the county, and what you see on page 2 of my exhibits, is essentially western Douglas County. You can see where Ava is, but I knew from as a child living in Good Hope, or living in Dogwood actually, in the early 50s, I remember going with my mother to the Good Hope Drive-In. And there was, if you want to, how did we turn out, by the way? Who ended up? Oh, good. Okay, so it went all the way around. All right. That Good Hope Drive-In was essentially where the G is in the word Good Hope. It was on that northeast corner. You can still go out there. I've got some pictures that in your handout that didn't come out real well, and because they were originally in color, but Martin Cathcott, who owns that place now, essentially he stores farm equipment out in the middle of that field, which was the projection booth. And you can still see evidence of it having been a projection booth. Then the McKnights had a theater for a short time in the late 40s at Roy, and I talked to Naomi the other night, and we've agreed it's 48 to 50. They were essentially forced out by the Good Hope Drive-In opening in about 1950 or 1951. How many of you remember that there was a drive-in between Bruner and Sparta, though? Did you ever have occasion to go there? Okay. All right. Well, you can. I've been out in that field, and the concrete platform is there where it was, and there's no other evidence of it. Now, that's really. I have missed, of course, Pettit's Drive-In that's on Highway 14 out north of town. So we're talking about those locations that I'll be mentioning to you that my research is involved in. And someone made the point, well, you suppose there was something ever in eastern Douglas County? And I don't know. The McKnight's operation in Roy was, I don't mean to call it simple, but it was basic enough. I could believe that there were other places, Howard, that someone could have done that. You don't recall any others either, do you? I've heard someone said there's one at Dora, which is really, of course, Ozark County, not Douglas County. There was at Dora. Okay.
Traveling fella stopped all those stores. He had to portable equipment, carry it from one place to another.
Okay. All right.
An empty store building or something.
Now, the Knights told me that they did that on one occasion. They took their equipment to Chadwick and set up in a store there. So let's go to my chronology. When I got interested in this last summer, and I took Curry's book, the 1957 history, and all the Douglas County Historical Society journals that I had. I've got a few years, but not, of course, the whole set. And it's the way I try to see history, is I tried to make just a chronological listing of all the major events. And I've got a computer file going that's a lot bigger than what you see on these 2 pages. There's a lot of events that aren't relevant to what I'm talking about tonight. But in terms of all these theaters here in Ava, or most of them, if you don't know it, of course, Howard's father and his grandfather and Henry Wilson, whose home we are in, right? That they were very much involved with all those initial efforts. And of course, the Pettits stayed involved all the way up till even now. And so it was important to me to just get a sense of how old Howard, your grandfather, was. And no, right, yeah, I have nailed you.
He's already done that in here.
So it's here, Howard. So you want to take me outside and whip me now, or wait till it's over. But
most everyone here knows anyway.
Okay.
We can always claim it's a typo.
Yeah, it's a typo. Yeah, it's a typo.
No, I'm thankful I made it one more day.
But why it was also important for me is that when you read the Curry book or other historical accounts, so many times it would say that J.W. Pettit, which is Howard's grandfather, and L.H. Pettit, which is Howard's father, and H.S. Wilson were in partners on one venture or another. And as I just saw that so often, I couldn't get a good sense of what their relationship must have been until I put some of these dates down. And of course, Mr. Wilson was 20 years older than your father. And Mr. Wilson had been your father's principal in school. And while your grandfather and he were just, looks like, about the same age, according to what I have here, about 4 years difference. And I felt like that was rather important, that whenever we talk about what Lester did or what Henry S. Wilson did, their relative ages are a factor in it. But anyway, that's what is at the top of my chronology are some of those dates. And of course, in 1992, as maybe many of you know, Henry S. Wilson, he married Belle Reynolds. That's how the Reynolds and Wilsons got together. And I noticed in his obituary, I think it said that they had met at the Mountain Grove Academy. He was really an Eastern Douglas County kid, or he had lived with relatives in Eastern Douglas County and ended up from there in Mountain Grove School, and that's how he got full circle back here. He's shown in 1897 as principal of the normal school, when it was in fact just here to the east of us, up toward Water Tower Hill.
Up behind us
Okay.
on the hill.
And at that time, Mr. Wilson was about 32 years old, according to the dates I have here, and your father was a student there. And then I specifically made a note of Lena Wilson McClendon's birth date, which is from an interview that she has in the journal. How many of you have read that? Like 1987 is the journal yeah. And she has a really nice account about the Opera House in there. And but I wanted to put her birth date down because it's important a little later here. In 99, the normal school building burned. And then I saw in the Herald here just a little while back, or saw it in a clipping that maybe my mother had kept, where there was something called well, it was spelled in the Herald, you see in the year 1900, Knedescope. I think it's a misspelling of a kinetoscope, which a kinetoscope was those initial peep shows that they used around 1900 to show a very short film, because they didn't have the ability yet to project the film. There was no way of projecting, or they hadn't really mastered that much at that time. And so I have gone to the Herald office and tried to get that initial issue, and I didn't talk to Keith, but I couldn't find the microfilm there for that specific event. So I don't really have that tied down as to when it happened or who was involved. Howard, your father would have been only 14 years old at that time. Have you ever heard any talk about that kind of event? Anybody else? I remember as a kid in the 50s when I went to the fair here, there'd be kind of a penny arcade where they bring in those old machines, and you could pay a nickel and see just it was kind of a novelty. But that's what. So I'm identifying that as the first date that a movie type entertainment occurred in the county. Okay, that's why it's on the list. Jumping on down to 1907, this is where, from an interview that Lester Pettit gave the Herald, and I've given you a copy of it on page 7. At the time that they renovated what was the Wilson on the east side of the square, he told about the very first days of movies. And he identified 1907 as the first date that a movie was shown here. He says that he was the one who showed it, and he implies that it occurred in the old Opera House. And so I'm thinking that the Opera House has to go back to 1907 or earlier. Okay, and Cinita, have you ever heard a date
How old
given?
was Lena when she passed away, and she had her 16th birthday?
Well, now see, look on down to 1913. In going through the Herald on December 28, 1913, I stumbled onto a social item that said, on a Saturday night, they all gathered out at your grandfather's place at the lake, Howard, and Lena pressed the button that sent electricity to Ava. Now that's in the Herald. Now in her interview in the Journal, she says on her 16th birthday, the Opera House was open and the skating rink was finished, and it was all, it was opened up in her honor. Well, that would have happened 2 days later than this electricity first coming. Well, Mr. Pettit back in '37 said they went for 5 or 6 years with an electrical generator at the Opera House because they had no electricity. So his story fits. That it had to have been. I wonder if Lena didn't mean the skating floor was finished in for her 16th birthday and not the Opera House. That's what I wonder if she meant. So I wanted to get that out in front of all of you local historians. Now on page 3, this is what, and Barbara, you and Jack, are the Sanborn insurance maps now here? That's okay. The Sanborn insurance maps, the Springfield Library helped me get the microfilm from them from University of Missouri, and I donated a set of them. I made copies of them that you could, hard copies, and have you all seen them here at the museum? Are they? Okay, I meant to bring my set down, but anyway, this little graphic of the Opera House is from the 1914 map that's here in the building now, somewhere, okay? And if you'll see, just to the, this is where the Casey's is. Everybody with me? You can even get a sense of the size of the Opera House from the scale that's...
It was that big corner.
And it looked like it, I think it pretty well, again, I'm really dying to see your picture of it, because I remember it being kind of a feed mill or something as a kid, but I didn't pay any attention to it. Huh?
Wasn't that Wallace's feed mill later?
Yeah, so I remember
Before
going
that,
back.
there were a lot of other people that had feed stores there.
Okay,
I mean,
but
that's what I remember.
anyway, I don't know if you can read it, but just on the east side of that building is a little attachment, and it indicates that there's an electrical generator there. And I think that's the electrical plant that your father was talking about. And that allowed them to show movies with electricity generated right there. Okay? Now this interview that I've given you a copy of says in 1907 he had to use limelight. They didn't even have the electrical generator there. And by limelight, jump in anytime you want, but by limelight, it was a gas-heated piece of lime. I guess, Howard, would it just glow as you got it really hot?
Yes. That was the idea.
To the point that it was intense enough that they could then project light through the film and the lens.
Acetylene torch. They used this lime.
Oh yeah, it was, so they just, yeah. Like, you know, and I suppose he did that in the crow's nest, if they had built the crow's nest yet. So I thought about then, if you've read Lena's account, you put a ladder up to the crow's nest, which was in the middle of the opera house. You climbed up there. You had to carry this gas up there. You had to carry the film up there. The projection angle, Howard, you said was very steep. And in later years, it got really hard to get the film even up there. But it sounds a little hazardous, doesn't it? It really does. But in his 37 interview, Lester said he himself showed that first film. Okay? He used a hand-cranked projector with this limelight, and it sounds pretty complicated. It doesn't sound easy.
That big ladder, he's probably the smallest person there. And it just went like that. I can remember that.
Oh, so it was not real steady. Okay. Okay. Now, you don't remember the limelight. Oh, no, you're not that old, unless you lied to me. Okay.
You heard about it.
But even in 1914, look what the insurance map says about it. By the way, these insurance maps were apparently, I have one from Springfield, and there's other towns in Missouri, that I guess they were sold to insurance companies. It helped the insurance companies to decide what rates, what insurance rates to put for fire purposes. And you know, fires were really a major problem back then. Anyway, it says motion pictures, opera house, and skating rink. And this is as of July 1914. That's the copyright date on this. Wood picture booth. Everybody pick up where I'm reading? Heat comes from stoves. The lights from an electrical, I think it means electrical plant. I can't really, the IEP, anybody here know how to decipher that? And then just to the north is where that gasoline engine generator is, just to the east is. You can see that the size of the building from the scale looks to be at least 50 feet wide and at least 100 feet long. Okay? And the bottom half of this page 3 is the copyright that's on the maps that are now here in the museum. And I can probably only read this, maybe I can't even read it. You see the population was cited at 725. Because I read this last night, and anyway.
It says prevailing winds.
Okay, prevailing winds. Help me out, Marilyn. What? Water?
Facilities.
None. I think it means none.
No
and
steam.
No steam or hand. They're talking about firefighting equipment. There's not any firefighting equipment.
No hose cart.
No hook and ladder truck. Okay. So basically, they're telling the insurance agent there's nothing.
Well, you could really read.
Okay. So,
How can you see that,
very good.
Marilyn, I guess you should.
I better not complain about my bifocals.
So, anyway.
You've been to the eye doctor, ain't you?
I did spend a little time in the Herald office looking back in the 1907 Herald, and it seems like that particular decade, didn't seem like there was a whole lot in the paper. Anybody else spend time in there. I was in somewhat of a hurry, but I couldn't really isolate, like an ad in 1907 that says, hey, we're going to show a film. Now, see, at the time, there was no electricity here. There were no paved roads. In fact, I believe that was a period when city government had disbanded. Wasn't there a period where they, as the Curry book says, the city they dissolved for lack of interest. People weren't paying their taxes, and it was only back in the teens that they then formed again. So anyway, so it was a pretty basic place. By the way, in terms of 1907, in terms of showing a film here, what I can check in Springfield, maybe 1904, 1905, maybe about the first time they were showing them. So it wasn't long before that technology came to Ava, mainly through Lester Pettit. Now, but Lester was only 21 years old when he was shown that with Limelight. I get the impression that, of course, it was Wilson's Opera House. I get the impression that Mr. Wilson often had the means by which to build the facility. Without an opera house, there would not have been a place to play, and he did provide that. Now, so I want to leave a question to the group: is when did the old opera house initially open? And I would. Anybody ever have any information? That's partly why I put my phone number and everything on the front cover of the chronology. I think it's at least 1907 or earlier. And I think that Lena's interview, she maybe meant something a little different than how I read that initially. Okay? Any comments?
What number do you think Betty's Burlock might could shed any light on?
Now, see, I'm not familiar. Is that...
She goes back.
It's
Right.
Lena's daughter.
She's Lena's
Betty,
daughter.
the Clinton.
Oh, okay.
And
Well,
her
Wilson's there in
brother lives in
Springfield.
Springfield. Wilson lives in Springfield. He was a,
Mhm.
what, that's something in the
He's
government
older
up
than
there
Betty,
for years.
Yeah.
Mary,
Used to be on the city council.
Wilson's older than Betty, isn't he?
Yeah,
Mhm.
he is.
Okay. Let me call him. Okay.
I don't know this, but they might know something.
Okay. Now, Howard missed all that because he wasn't born yet. And put this down. Mr. Reynolds, who was Mrs. Wilson's, Belle Wilson's father, passed away in 1921. And it's in this era that permanent theaters are starting to open up. In my interview with Howard and Marian, the film was getting more and more difficult to get up to that crow's nest. And so I've identified that what Mr. Wilson and the Pettits did was on August 12, 1926. They did finish the theater that was on the east side of the square. It was initially called the Wilson Theater. Okay. I don't think probably hardly anyone here who attended it as a Wilson Theater. Okay. And it was, though, a remodeling of Wilson's hardware store. And that's why on page 4, this is from Curry's book. And Howard and Marian have told me that they really, when you're running a business, you don't think that much to take pictures of them. And they don't really have a picture of the Avalon. What you see here is the east side of the square in 1920. And you'll see the two-story hardware that's right next to the Reynolds building. And I believe that facade was kept. That front was kept. And the Pettits and Wilson gutted the building, so to speak, and built a theater in there, okay, with a balcony, okay, and finally an official projection booth. And it, as I read the Herald, it immediately became the place where the school plays were kept, and it was not entirely just a movie house. There were regular showings of the movies, but there were a lot of special events, and it seems like at that point the limelight fell away from the old opera house. might have still been used for basketball or some things, skating, I suppose. You see, the Ava gym wasn't built until in the 30s. The gymnasium that went between the old high school and the new high school, all of which, of course, you know, is gone. But I am dying to see, Cinita, a good picture of the Avalon that was on the east side, because childhood memories are really fading for me. I will say, while I'm passing by here, I don't know, Howard, you and I talked about this as to what happens to the sign that's on the Avalon over on the southwest corner of the square. That is the sign that the Pettits put there in 1938. I'll give you the date. So that sign by itself is almost 60 years old, and so it was on there. The page 5 is actually a 1935 Sanborn insurance map that again is here in the museum. It's now available here in the museum in that series that Barbara and Jack brought over. And you'll see on the right-hand side a little depiction of what was then still the Wilson Theater. You see where it says movies? You see where the balcony, how they've drawn the balcony? Okay. Everybody see where I'm at?
So it's different than page 2, which is 1914?
Oh, yes. Yeah, now this is...
I'm sorry, page 3.
Yes, because on page 3, Tommy, we're talking about the Opera House. It was called the Wilson's Opera House.
But they're both Sanborn
Oh, yes,
drawings.
yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about theaters, not the maps. Yeah, we've got three years of them. We got 1914, 1925, and 1935. Got it?
Howard probably can answer this easier than me, but it seems to me that in the early 30s, prior to 34, 35, that the theater was, common usage was, they called it the Wilson Theater, didn't they? Before the name Avalon went up, possibly, I don't know, or maybe it was just that people remembered it had been and they kept referring to it as a Wilson Theater.
Maybe I better go back. Go ahead.
Ken has that
Yeah,
information.
look at the guy. Look at the chronology. Let's jump back to it a minute because I don't know if I'm presenting this real well. Look, on August 26th, the Wilson Theater opened. In 1931, the first talking show. Now remember, prior to 31 here in Ava, all the films were silent films. Okay, so the first talkie was in 31. I did have that exact date because I found it in the Herald. I think it's September of 31. It's a little different than when you read Lester's 1937 interview. He says the first talkie was November 1st, 31. When you read the Heralds, it in fact happened a couple of months before then, and that's understandable. At least it was advertised to occur. No, I think it says it did occur 2 months before then.
Ken, do you have any idea how far behind we were on the national
Yeah.
level? Like,
Still not too far behind,
Oh, really?
because, let's see, they tend to, as I've studied movie history in the country, they tend to identify the sound movie stage as 1929 with Al Jolson's The Jazz Singer. And so, although... Although probably in the larger cities, they were starting to work with it maybe in 1927. Now, so between 29 and 31, it became a time, Howard, when theaters either converted or they went out of business. And some did. Theaters that I have seen on list for like Bakersfield down in Ozark County or at Hollister, they were open in like 27, 28, and then they disappeared from the listings I looked from, never to open again. And apparently the owners either couldn't or weren't able to rewire their theaters to sound. Okay. Now, Guy, we're still talking about it being the Wilson.
Yeah.
Now, in 1937, and this is where Ava entered a rather competitive period when there was a second theater opening up, and the Wilson Theater was remodeled, and I think, okay, that's the 1937 interview that I've given you a copy of. That was the reason why Mr. Pettit was being interviewed, was he was telling also about all the renovations to the Wilson. And then they advertised the very next week, or they advertised here on June 17, 37, as the new Wilson. And you'll see some clippings in my handout in just a moment. Let's jump on down. You know, of course, this was when Mr. Wilson was getting up in his 70s, and he died, I believe, here in this building on September 18th, 1937. So, and whenever the Wilson was being renovated in June of 37, all the Herald articles imply that your father was the sole operator of the theater at that point. And Mr. Wilson, although they still owned the building, Mr. Wilson was no longer an active part of the business. Then there's the Thrasher open here in 1937, about this same time, at a location just north of the square, location C on page 1 of my handout. Everybody remember where that was? The building's still there, and anyway, they were in there first. So from 1937 until 1940, we had 2 competing theaters going in town. However, and I'll jump by it here, look at July 15, 37. This George Owen or Harold Owen, who are from Seymour, they had a tent show at Good Hope. It was advertised in the Herald, and this was happening, I think, Howard, you said, outside of Ava quite a bit. Not in Ava, but at Wasola or at Squires and perhaps other locations. There were the traveling movie people. They brought in their portable projector. They'd have a screen. Any of you go to a tent show? They had a screen, or a tent screen is what I'm trying to say, a tent wall that went around in a circle. It didn't have a top, and the outside of the tent show was to keep you from looking in. They wanted you to pay admission to get in. So it really wasn't a tent in that it had a top to it. But Owen was even out at Good Hope. He did this right behind the Good Hope store in 37 with a tent show. He advertised, by the way, a couple of movies that I have tried to find, and I can't find them in any directory of movies. I don't know what he was showing. So now, December 16th, 1937. And let me take you to some exhibits at this point. Page 6 was my trying to give you a little taste of what was going on in the Wilson. These are all 1926, 1927 ads, except you got Wilson's Opera House in the upper left-hand corner, which would have been one of the last plays, I suppose, there. Everything else here was going on in the Wilson. And then if you turn the page to number 7, and I want you to look at the bottom article that says Ava people to be pictured in movies. Everybody see that little? I would love to see this film. Apparently the Thrashers, Howard, brought in some outfit from Oklahoma City who took pictures around the city in 1937, went and developed their film and came back and then showed it in the Thrasher Theater.
Isn't that the one that they showed
You
at
have
the
it?
courthouse,
Yeah.
Marilyn?
We have it.
Yeah. I saw somebody showed that at the
Who all
courthouse.
has seen it then? Is it
It's
so
the
it's common?
slides.
Oh, it's not
No,
motion
no.
picture?
Is that the one
It's
that
a
had
movie,
they
isn't
were
it?
doing the
Yeah.
beauty shop, Marilyn? Is that the same one?
Well, does it have a lot of scenes of that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I would like to arrange some way to see that. I really would like to see that.
We could probably get you a copy.
Oh, right, okay. Now, that's in 1930, yeah, I really have. I knew this was, I was tired of looking at the Herald. It was time to come and talk to them. And of course, December 1st, 38 article that indicates that the Wilson burned. It burned, looks like, on Thanksgiving, the evening of Thanksgiving. Fire was noticed by Mr. Pettit at the rear of the theater, and it burned. Interesting though, it was shut down for only 2 months. You all rebuilt it that quickly because it shows up as opening again. And on my list, we're going to the second page of my chronology. It opened again January 27th of 39. After being rebuilt, it opened with Alexander's Ragtime Band. Then, again, this was a time when, although the Wilson estate owned the building, Mr. Pettit was the sole owner and operator. And the ad came out on May 25th, 39, and I think I provided you with a copy in here, where they changed the name to Pettit's Avalon. That's why, until that time, it was the Wilson, same building, but they changed the name.
I can remember coming to Merchant Supply, tickets to movies, and on Saturday.
Okay.
I came in sometime in the 30s, early 30s. I don't remember when.
Okay. Now, it was at this time in May of 39 that you all put the new Avalon sign out front. You put neon lighting, and there's an indication in the Herald that it really made the square look better at night because of that neon light in 39. And of course, that is the sign that has been moved on to the current Avalon. Is that there? In April 22nd, 1940, the Thrasher closed. About a week later, the Pettit's ad came out and had a special note to all the citizens saying, we've heard rumors that you think we're going to increase the prices because we're the only theater in town, but we assure you we won't do that. And except for special showings of major films that the film company required them to, like Gone with the Wind, which was coming about that time. Also Jesse James, Grapes of Wrath. Those were all biggies at that time, and the film companies required extra high prices. And even on Gone with the Wind, it was reserved seating. You had to buy your seats in advance to even to come see it. So between 1940 and 1943, it looks like this Avalon is the only theater in town. But then in 1943, the Thrasher theater ads come back. But in the meantime, although the Thrashers emptied out their theater, which is down, how do I want to say this? Everybody know where the old Star was? Do I need to? It was north of what I call Norman Gentry Drugstore. On the north side of the square, the north...
Across from Senior Citizen.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
To the west of the Senior Citizen Center. Okay, is where that building is. Well, the Pettits had started to open that up as a second theater when Thrashers came back. And so on April 15th, 43, they must have opened up Howard in what you call the Meeker building. Agreed? Okay. But it only stayed open about 5 months. And, well, no, maybe, 5 or 6 months. On August 19th of 43, the Pettits opened a second theater. So between August 19th and December 10th, there were 3 movies going at one time in town. And 2 owned by the Pettits and 1 by the Thrashers. Howard, in my first talk with him, thought that Russell Meeker